I'm excited to share Andy Bracken's song Roots in this episode. Andy's a musician from Western North Carolina, and this is a song from his album Fading Appalachia. You can find a link to Andy and his work in the show notes. This is Amy, and you're listening to the Talkin' Appalachian podcast.
That big red oak up on the hill, he's got roots that sure run deep. Never be ashamed of who you are when you open your mouth to speak. You sound like burley tobacco, scuffed up Irish settlers, and patched up pointer old
Hillbilly, redneck, trailer trash, white trash. Now that I have your attention, these are some of the words that have been used to describe the people of Appalachia. Words that you might hear in jokes, words that you might have even heard some people owning proudly. It seemed like a good time to dive into these words to unpack their histories and meanings. This episode began about the origins of the word hillbilly, but as I got into the research, I realized you can't really talk about hillbilly without other somewhat loaded words like redneck and white trash. And if you're not from here, you might use them interchangeably, as if they all mean the same thing. But if you're from a part of this region, you know they don't have the same meanings. These are complicated words because they have different definitions depending on who you talk to. And that means they're loaded with all of these subjective meanings. So I'm going to start with redneck because we're coming up on Labor Day, and the Appalachian coal fields are significant when we think about the roots of labor movement in this country. In late August to early September of 1921, some 10,000 striking miners marched to Mingo County, West Virginia, in what is known as the Battle of Blair Mountain, and this is where the 20th century version of redneck comes from. But before I tell you more about that, let's go back in time for a little more context. Appalachia was industrialized in the late 19th century when coal prospectors from the north discovered that our mountains were full of coal seams, black gold. They bought up land, and that's another story because they used unscrupulous practices basically to steal a lot of people's land that had been in their family for generations. They built railroads and they created coal towns along those rail lines in which every miner's house looked the same. And you can still see remnants of these coal towns, and the houses, they've been modified by the people who live there over time, but you can still tell that they were the coal houses because structurally they all look very much alike. These coal towns were self-contained. Everything you needed was there. Schools, movie theaters, hospitals, the general store. I've talked to people that grew up in coal towns that said in a lot of ways it was great, particularly to be a kid there because you had everything that you needed. And it was all owned by the company. But in early days, miners were paid in scrip, which was worthless outside the company town, and so they basically traded scrip for what they needed at the company store, and most of the time they stayed in debt to that company store. Miners began to organize as a result of unsafe working conditions. They never knew when a roof fall or an explosion might take them out, and if a miner was killed, his wife and family were evicted from that home so another miner could move in, and they were evicted immediately. They were also paid by the weight of the coal they dug, and company scales, of course, were calibrated in the company's favor. They were not fair. To keep unions out, the companies hired what came to be known as gun thugs to keep miners in check. Organizing could be deadly, and companies famously hired men from the Pinkerton Detective Agency to root out these organizers. Listen to miner Hobart Grills talk about gun thugs in a 1974 interview, courtesy of Appleshop and the Appleshop Archive.
My name is Hobart Grills, and I was born at Aegis, Kentucky, at the Brookside Mines, about a mile where the strike is going on right now. I'm 56-year-old, and I've lived in Harlan County for 56 years. I worked 26 years in the coal mines. I worked for the Harlan Wallens Coal Corporation, and I know what it's like to be a coal miner in Harlan County, and that is one of the reasons. In 1931, and that's what they call the Battle of Everett's. where the Union and coal operator and gun thugs had what is known as a battle at Everett, where there was several Union men killed and a whole lot of gun thugs was killed. And then we had several good Union brothers that had to go to the penitentiary for this killing. And then in the late 1930s, we was out on another strike, and when they sent the National Guards, at that time Governor Happy Chandler, but we still won our contract with the gun thugs and the National Guard. And in 1941, they had what was known was the Union Battle at Crummies Creek, Kentucky, where 5 Union brothers was shot to death by gun thugs. We never did know exactly how many gun thugs was killed in that battle, because the coal operators and the gun thugs would always do like the Viet Cong and the North Vietnamese. They'd always hide the dead and never did give no death count. Talking about gun thugs and how the gun thugs was paid. Well, today the United Mine Workers has a royalty of so much per ton that goes in there to give the miners a pension and their welfare card, hospital card. Well, and back in the 1930s on up, they had each coal operator paid so much royalties in to the Harlan County Coal Operators Association or to a club or something like that, which was took and used to hire gun thugs for each coal mining camp. At each one of the mines, work like I work for Harlan Wallens, which owned 5 coal mines. And they had anywhere from 3 to 4 on up to as high as sometimes 10 gun thugs at each one of those mines. In those days, if a stranger come to town, if they thought that somebody's in trying to organize the union, well, they was either kicked out or take one of these bank belts and give them a good whipping. And then if they thought they was organized, a lot of times they would be killed. So that is a part of what where Harlan County got its name as Bloody Harlan. And this is 1941. Well, we went ahead and we won this battle. The governor and the United Mine Workers and the coal operators, they had made a truce that the coal operators would not try to put no scabs to work at their mines, and the Union, they accepted this agreement and agreed to not have no pickets. And it went ahead and the contract was signed. And we didn't have too much more trouble, only when they go to sign a national contract in the late 1940s on up in the early 50s, sometimes we'd be out 3 or 4 months getting a national contract signed. In the middle and late 50s, when the coal slump, when they couldn't sell the coal, when they went to importing oil from these other oil countries over here, that's when they went to trying to bust the Union, and which in District 19 was successful because the UMWA president and field representative and all of them, they worked right into the coal operators' hand. And that's one thing that tore down the Union that all of us old coal miners built in District 19. And so then we started, had what they call was the roving pickets. And that was going all over eastern Kentucky, striking mines and trying to get them to quit signing sweetheart contracts and so on and so forth. And like the coal operator would sign a contract in the district, their international union at that time, they didn't care if you made $4, $5, or $6 a day, as long as they cut the union dues and paid the royalty, the welfare royalty, so much a ton on the coal. Well, me and the miners of all I ever known or ever talked to about John L. Lewis. He was just like a king or a god to the most of us, and still is to most people, and is with me, with one exception. I believe in the last years of John L. Lewis's life, I think he made some mistakes, but in other words, I think he swapped the manpower, like the pick and shovel days, for machinery to go in there and take the coal miners' jobs in there, when that was the reason that was helping them to help the coal operators to bust the Union, because they got The men got to needing to work, and there's no work, no demand or nothing. And that's the reason there's having a lot of people's having to work from anywhere from $4, $5, and $6 a day at these little old dog hole mines around all over Harlan County and other countries to try to make a living for their family.
It's been a history of gun thugs and script, and every indignity that could have been offered to the people was. Just same way as in Harlan. The county that I went to public school in Mingo County, West Virginia, was ruled by the boss of Logan County for a long time, a sheriff, Don Chapin, who collected a form of royalty to hire gun thugs from all over the country. He did this. And in the 20s, they fought their big battles out. My daddy knew about them, was in on them in southern West Virginia when the mine workers moved their armies out of Marmette, Charleston area, and was met by Don Chapin's huge army on Blair Mountain. And they fought until the soldiers was called in, and it was a long, bloody fight. And they've used that to beat poor people and the miners all along, and that's all we've known. That's what has built us up for the present things we'll accept, like strip mining, that let them come in to destroy our hills, our creeks, our rivers. And they do this in all sections of Appalachia. All we've known, all our daddies knew, and granddaddies has been things like gun thugs and people trying to keep people from being organized. They never have the decency to let up, and the sure death through black lung or sure death through slate falls and other form of ways that a man could get killed inside a coal mine. We don't have that choice. Poverty is what the coal companies has brought to Appalachia. It's brought it to Harlan County. It's brought it everywhere in Appalachia. And poverty has a lot of faces. It means a lot of things. And one of them's a poverty of choice. Hobart and John Tiller didn't have any choice when we went to coal mine. We had to go or work in a filling station or some job that wouldn't pay us enough to live on at that time, or leave. And we've got nowhere to go. This is our home. And the same story, what Hobart says, they never quit punishing you. Our children, if they don't want to be coal miners, they have to leave the area. Hobart Grill's family poor, John Tiller's family poor, so we'll always have that no choice but to be coal miners.
And another thing maybe that would be interested about people, the reason they come to Harlan County and Appalachia, our old ancestors that settled in this country, in the Appalachian, they was getting away from the city and bright lights and come in here and settled. And if they didn't know it at the time, but they settled, and the Appalachia hits one of the richest lands on this earth, anywhere. Well, them being uneducated then, and then years after, they settled in here. Here come these absentees people then, like Duke Power, the Rockefellers, and all of them, and they stole their land, the coal rights and land and timber away for about 50 cents to $1 an acre. And then they, in other words, just took their lands. They robbed them of nothing. People in Appalachia and in Harlan County is still being treated worse than dogs.
West Virginia author Denise Giardina wrote a historical novel influenced by the events of this time called Storming Heaven. And she collected oral histories from miners for her research. One of the most horrifying stories she heard, and this is a warning because it's very violent, was about a black miner suspected of organizing who was thrown alive into a furnace in front of his fellow miners to make an example of him. She wrote that scene into the book. The miner who witnessed the man's murder told her that he started singing once he knew he was going to die, and he kept singing until he died. So you can imagine how important it was for the Union miners to stay secret until they were ready to go on strike as a group. One of the ways they called out the miners was by pulling a red bandana out of their pockets and tying it around their necks. It was a way of identifying themselves as Union when the time came. But people who were anti-Union would also call these men Bolsheviks and communists. So red also became synonymous with communism and socialism among those who were aligned with the company. These miners literally went to war against the company, police, militias, and eventually federal troops. And while that particular battle didn't end in their favor, it ignited more people to fight for fair pay and safe working environments all across the United States. We're so far removed from those early days now. Labor Day is synonymous with cookouts and that last day on the lake and a day off from work. I don't even think many kids know what it's about. But please take the opportunity to tell them, especially if your kids are from Appalachia. If you work and you enjoy equal pay in a safe working environment, remember that people fought and died for fair labor practices. They're still fighting for that. And that's why we take a day to remember them.
No matter where you roam, you'll never be that far. They'll all tell you that it's wrong, holding on to yesterday. But you just keep a good firm grip on those ancient tones and ways.
Now, redneck didn't start there. It was in use in the United States as early as the late 1800s to describe, and I'm quoting from the Dictionary of American Regional English, the poor southern white man, particularly the farmer, whose neck is sunburned from working in the fields. But in some cases, it took on more hateful connotations, as in, quote, insignificant, low-grade person, end quote. And this is where the terms white trash and hillbilly began to be lumped into this category. Historian Nancy Eisenberg wrote a New York Times best-selling book about the subject of class-specific nicknames appropriately titled white trash. Eisenberg tracks the term all the way back to the 1500s and 1600s in Europe, where class distinction was important and poor whites needed to be classified as a distinct breed. Now, poor whites were looked down upon, much like they are today, but they had a useful purpose. If you were a king who needed expendable people to colonize a new world, for example, that's who you'd send, knowing that they would succumb to disease or attacks, and you could just keep sending more until communities took root. Same thing in the United States. If you're an unscrupulous company and you need expendable people to harvest or manufacture a dangerous product so that you can make money, you're going to market to the lower classes to do that. By the 1940s, 50s, and 60s, words like hillbilly, redneck, and white trash were associated with poor white Southerners and Appalachians and often used interchangeably. But for politicians in particular, Eisenberg says the hillbilly image became a stage act that enabled them to straddle class divisions. That's a quote from her book. And that worked, and it's still working. It worked all the way up to Southern President Bill Clinton, who jokingly said he had a little bit of Bubba in him. And let's not forget that country music and NASCAR, who embraced these words and helped to redefine them, and they became, especially for people who embraced them, a badge of authenticity. That particular rhetorical strategy continues to work for politicians today as that gap between classes grows even larger. I had to ask myself, am I a hillbilly? And if I am, what does that mean? I love the Appalachia that I know. And I guess I would say, yes, I'm proud to be a hillbilly. But the hillbilly I am is not the one that's been packaged and sold over time. The mountaineer in the overalls that's barefoot with the beard and the missing teeth and the big white hat and the moonshine jug. That's not the hillbilly version that so many of us identify with. I think to understand what my version of hillbilly means, you would have to spend time here, but I'll try to describe it for you. It means walking into a feed store, a hair salon, a bank, and listen to how people who know each other say hello and goodbye. Listen to the questions they ask and what they already know about each other. You'd need to drive some winding country road and see the remains of chimneys where somebody's home place once stood. Crawl up a bank covered in kudzu to see a family burial ground in the woods. You'd need to get in a kayak or a john boat and float down the Powell River and pull a few red-eye out of the water and wave to somebody on their front porch as you drift by. You'd need to learn how to break beans, hoe some tobacco, sit around a molasses pan. You'd need to hear a funeral preached, watch people nod their heads, clap their hands to a cappella hymns. And that's just the beginning of what I think it means to me. You can listen to just about any episode of this podcast, and I think you would get even more of a picture of what that means to me.
Sadly, it'll be that way most everywhere you go. And count it blessings that you were born under Appalachian stars. And no matter where you roam, you'll never be that far. They'll all tell you that it's wrong, holding on to yesterday. But you just keep a good firm grip on those ancient tones and ways. Chimney smoke drifts down the holler, slowly fades away. Long forgotten traditions in old halos of gray. Moonshine steals and fallen leaves in the frosty glow of morn. Never be ashamed of these old hills, the place where you were born. Counted blessings that you were born under Appalachian stars. And no matter where you roam, you'll never be that far. They'll all tell you that it's wrong, holding on to yesterday. But you just keep a good firm grip on those ancient tones and ways. Just keep a good firm grip on those ancient tones and ways.
If you haven't, I would love it if you'd go take a look at the bonus content over at Patreon. I have bonus interviews with Pulitzer-winning author Barbara Kingsolver, Southern social media sensation Landon Bryant, and the Glass Castle's Jeanette Walls. And these are extra interviews that you won't hear on the regular podcast. I've also got documentary essays there on an 18th century cemetery, the ghosts of Mountain Lake Lodge in Virginia, and my reflections on interviewing an Appalachian Holocaust survivor. If you don't want to commit to a subscription, any of these can be accessed with a modest one-time donation. That supports my hours of research and editing because I'm a staff of one, but I love it and I love bringing this content to you. So if you've been thinking about joining me there, now's a great time to follow the link in the show notes or over on social media.